The Lord had instructed Joseph in the Revelation on April 6th when the church was organized that the saints should get together and meet every 3 months or so. And as a result, on June the 9th of 1830, the saints got together again in Fayette at the home of Peter Whitmer Sr., and they were probably excited to get together. They had their little branches down in Colesville and Harmony area in Fayette itself, and of course up where the Smith family lived in Manchester. And so getting together on June the 9th probably was an exciting time for them. They had a wonderful meeting. Joseph spoke, really gave a sermon out of Ezekiel chapter 14, which talked about the gathering, really an apostasy and a gathering.
Yet behold, therein shall be left a remnant that shall be brought forth, both sons and daughters. Behold, they shall come forth unto you, and ye shall see their way and their doings. And they shall comfort you, when ye see their ways and their doings. And ye shall know that I have not done without cause all that I have done in it, saith the Lord God.
Joseph's sermon on Ezekiel chapter 14, where through the prophet Ezekiel, the Lord was castigating the people for having their hearts turned to idols and evil before their face. The last two verses suggest that the Lord would preserve a remnant that would set a proper example for the world, and that would show that all of the calamities that came upon the unrighteous because of their hearts being turned to evil would be straightened out or rectified by the example that would be set by a modern day people. And Joseph, being the visionary that he was, it must have been remarkable for those people to believe that such a small handful of people could influence the entire world. And yet we're living today to see where our example is influencing the entire world.
The next conference of the church in 1830 is held on September the 26th. Joseph and Emma are still living down in Harmony, which is, 60, 70 miles south. So it's really quite a trip for them to come up to Fayette to these conferences at the home of Peter Whitmer Sr. They come up, and of course, Joseph discovers there's been a problem. Hiram Page, who's one of the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, has a seer stone. And he says that he's receiving revelations via this seer stone, claims to have received some indication of where the city of Zion should be built and things like that. As a result, Joseph, while he's in the Fayette area, receives the last 14 verses of section 27 and then also sections 28 and 29, really where the Lord delineates the nature of priesthood keys and who should be receiving revelation for the church and the kingdom. As he begins the conference, of course, they do some ordaining of brethren. Some additional elders are ordained. And Joseph also teaches them out of Isaiah chapter 5, where again, he seems to have read this before, and he's talking to them about the importance of this restoration and order of the kingdom.
When Joseph Smith taught from Isaiah chapter 5 about the decadent nature of the people in the latter days, where they were drunken and where they were grossly distorting the truth, where they were calling evil good and good evil, where they were so self-centered and self-righteous, he said that the Lord in the last days would raise up an ensign to the nations where people would flock to it. And we indeed have become that ensign to the nation in not only things of welfare, but our emphasis on the family.
These conferences set the pattern that we still follow today in the church. The early saints met, they conducted necessary business. Of course, they enjoyed singing hymns together and praying, and I guess the main benefit of the conference was that the saints encouraged each other. Now, at the time that Joseph Smith was first conducting these conferences, there was no distinction between local conferences and general conferences such as we have today. But the conferences that we know, state conferences, ward conferences, the general conference, all of them follow these same basic patterns. The original conferences were held every 6 months, it appears, and that is the pattern we still follow for our general conferences.
Of course, this is also the conference at which Oliver Cowdery and Peter Whitmer Jr. are called on a mission to the Lamanites. This is the time when Parley P. Pratt is going to come on the scene a little bit later. He'll be called by revelation, and Ziba Peterson will as well.
It's very significant that first group mission was not to a neighboring town, nor to a group of New Englanders, but to the Native Americans, a people who at that time were not highly regarded, who were being pushed ever westward in the face of the supposed manifest destiny of American whites.
Only months before these missionaries received the call of the Lord to go to teach the Native Americans in the Indian territories, the U.S. Congress had passed an Indian Removal Act in which most of the Native Americans of the area were going to be moved into the Kansas Territory. And therefore, that's where a main body of the Native Americans would be located for the missionaries to go teach.
I think what's interesting is, though, that the ancient Book of Mormon prophets themselves prophesied that the book would be taken to their descendants. But probably even more significant is the fact that the title page of the Book of Mormon clearly states, in fact, the first group the Book of Mormon is to be taken to are the Lamanites and their remnant.
And in section 3, the Lord indicates there as well that this record was coming forth to teach the Native Americans of their destiny, of their heritage, to help them know that the promises of the Lord pertain to them in a dramatic way, and that it was the obligation of Joseph Smith and those around him to carry this message to them as soon as possible. In mid-October 1830, literally just days after the revelations were given, the missionaries commenced their journey. Several days from Palmyra, they encountered the Seneca in the outskirts of what is today Buffalo, New York, visited them, spent a few hours, and left several copies of the Book of Mormon. Of course, they didn't know the language. Many Native Americans at that time did know English, or to a degree knew English, and they received the Book of Mormon in English. From that point, they took the normal route, which was to take passage on Lake Erie, and they sailed to Fairport, which was a port just outside of Paynesville, Ohio, and only a few miles from Kirtland.
As they came into Kirtland, Parley P. Pratt, who was a former Reformed Baptist minister, met his old friend Sidney Rigdon. And with Sidney Rigdon being a Reformed Baptist minister, with many people following him in the area, Parley P. Pratt was able to introduce many people to the Book of Mormon and the restoration of the gospel through his acquaintanceship with Sidney Rigdon.
This began an extensive bit of teaching in the area. Others of Rigdon's followers heard the gospel and embraced it readily. Within a matter of weeks, dozens joined the church. By year's end, some 100 had become Latter-day Saints. This was all in the brief stopover en route to Missouri, one of the unexpected and yet divinely anticipated steps in the unfolding of the restoration.
After leaving the northeastern Ohio area, the Kirtland area, the 4 missionaries to the Lamanites, now accompanied by Frederick G. Williams, went over to Sandusky, Ohio, where they preached the gospel to the Wyandot Indians. They were not too successful, but they then went down to Cincinnati, picked up a steamer there, and went on the Ohio River down to the mouth, there at what is today Cairo, Illinois. They found the Mississippi River clogged. It was a terribly cold winter, and ice flows. There was an impossible task to try to go upstream by steamer. So they ended up walking to St. Louis, spent a few days there, and then headed overland, nearly 300 miles to the western border of Missouri, to the Independence area, Jackson County.
The 4 missionaries almost immediately crossed the border into Indian Territory, what is now eastern Kansas. They taught for several days, and the interpreter